Welcome to Pastor's Podcast, Season 5, part of the Jesus Culture world. It's kind of funny because we record a bunch of these in batches, and so I feel like I'm doing the same exact introduction every time. I'm going to tell you about the school leadership, which you need to be a part of. I'm going to tell you about the Pastor's Conference in January you need to get to, but if you listen to the other podcasts, then you've already got it. I do want to say this as well. It's Season 5 because there's Seasons 1 through 4 as well. So you want to make sure you check those out. Excited today to have another co-host with us that was actually an OG original Jesus Culture podcast host, now hosts his own podcast called Man Camp. Lead pastor of Jesus Culture San Diego, Zack Curry. Zack, great to have you jumping in with us.
It's so good to be here. It's fun to see what's grown since 2011. I mean, the Jesus Culture Podcast Network is...
Yeah, I'd say it's a whole movement, but I don't know how many people are listening, so you don't know what constitutes a movement.
We went from 52, and who knows where we're at now, but yeah.
It's nice of you to leave the comfort of the beach city to fly up to just kind of the center, the middle of the, a little more
I'm
inland.
just trying to give back. I'm not forgetting my roots, right?
Zack and a team moved down to San Diego about over 2 years ago, but planted the church 2 years ago, and just doing such an incredible job down there. It's officially our second church.
Yeah.
And so we're believing God for California, but so doing such a great job down there. Pastoring, I was just sharing with Pastor Jude on the podcast that after planting in San Diego, I feel a real mandate and call from the Lord that anywhere we plant will be a beach city.
Absolutely.
I don't feel called to anything outside of beach cities.
That's the Lord right there.
So I'm willing, it can be all over the world, doesn't matter where, but it's going to be the south of Spain.
There's
or
a lot of beaches out there that
it's going to be Fiji, the south of Spain, Lisbon. It's going to be somewhere, Hawaii. All those are options. I just say, Lord,
here I am.
The world is wide open as long as it's a beach. So tell me this real quick, Zack, because you were with us. We've known each other since high school, but you were with us for 10 years in a variety of roles.
Yeah.
But this is the first time stepping into that lead pastor position. I've actually asked a couple of people on the podcast about this. What surprised you the most? Now, you were with us running a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
So you were in that number 2 kind of an executive pastor role. So you were running a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
What surprised you the most about stepping into the actual lead pastor position?
I think there's a weight that it's an intangible thing, not based on even responsibilities or roles that I definitely was not aware of. Even being here with you,
no, you can't. It's like not until you step into it. It's hard.
It's not a schedule, task, responsibility. It's a weight, spiritually, but responsibility like that.
Yeah,
it was definitely. I was like, it wasn't familiar because I'd never done it, and so that was an adjustment and a definite new piece of leadership that I had to learn and grow. And you build in support and figure out this is a new area that you got to build some rhythm and have health outlets, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I remember whenever you're at the top of the food chain too, in any organization really, you also have nobody else to blame if the culture is not what you want.
Totally.
And it's not like we spend our lives passing the buck, but there's always that thing that ultimately, I'm not the one making the final decision, so ultimately the culture isn't fully a reflection of my leadership.
Yeah.
And then you kind of come face to face with, this is a reflection of what I'm looking at
There's
right
no
now.
excuses,
is a reflection of my leadership.
I remember telling you early in just saying hey, thank you. It's like when you're a kid and you grow up and your parents do everything and all of a sudden you become a parent.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for that moment with my kids. Are you listening to this right now, kids? Go ahead.
I remember calling my dad one time. You're like, Dad, thanks.
Yeah, tell me.
Just little things like you don't realize how much money it costs to raise a kid. Like, thanks for buying me, basketball shoes, or just little things like I had no idea. Thank you.
The sacrifice involved. What are you enjoying most about it?
I've always loved building.
Sure.
So there's this responsibility, but then a freedom to build things that in some ways, every church, every leader has their own unique kind of thing, and so being able to build a team or a community and then seeing the impact of that has been really cool. Because we're the blueprint, the culture, the DNA is the same as Sacramento and San Diego, but like you and I are different people. So like you learn how to do that same vision, same heart, and then you kind of just discover stuff that is fun. That's been enjoyable for me.
Now, before we jump into the podcast with Levi, have you enjoyed a beach city?
Love it.
Really? Is it what you thought it'd be?
Yeah. We moved when we've been there 3 years. The first part, these last 3 years, we've been like 10 minutes from the beach.
Yeah.
So, we do a thing called Sunset Squad every Saturday night, pull people in.
Nobody wants to hear
I
this.
learned how to surf.
Yeah, nobody wants to hear this.
All that. So, yes, it has been typical. We just moved 30 minutes away, which is still not far, but it's been pretty cool.
Yeah, so fun. Well, I'm excited today to jump in and have a conversation with somebody that most everybody would know that's listening, Levi Lusko. Him and his wife are leading a great movement of churches coming out of Montana. I was just out there recently with him speaking for something they were doing over the summer, and just really, really impressed, really inspired by their culture, by what they're doing, by their church, by their team. And so excited to be able to sit down and just kind of have a conversation with one of the best. So we're excited to have Levi with us today. Well, Levi, we sure appreciate you taking time just to sit down and have a conversation, talk to some pastors and church leaders all the way from Montana. So I'm sure I'm assuming right now that, forgive me if I'm wrong with this, but you're coming off a ranch. You just got off a horse. You
fly fishing.
This is Californian's view of Montana.
Wait, did you say just got out of a horse?
No.
Like, is that like the Revenant? Where he had to cut himself out of that horse?
Yes.
That's a little Star Wars as well. No, this is
true. It's a very good observation.
Listen, help us understand real quick, because I want to get a little of your history, and I'm really grateful you're here. Honestly, though, I imagine not a ton of people have been to Montana. Like, I would know a lot of people there, but all their view of Montana would be probably what it'd be more of the Yellowstone. Yeah.
Do you hang out with Kevin Costner?
Is Montana what we think Montana is?
Well, the official word on the street is Montana's terrible, Montana's freezing, Montana's full.
He's just trying to keep everyone from California out.
Stay away.
Yeah. That's the official line. I did spend the morning bilge pumping rainwater out of my fishing boat, so by hand, which was a very cumbersome task. So that was how my morning went. I got a good arm workout. Montana is incredible. It's everything Lewis and Clark discovered, meaning that it's incredible. It's deadly. It's a state that's actively trying to kill you. I think yesterday a guy got his lower jaw bit off by a grizzly bear.
Oh my!
Wow.
That he stumbled upon, that was guarding a carcass that the grizzly thought the guy was trying to get. The guy was just trying to come through.
Yes.
So the bear literally French kissed him and then bit his lower jaw. So that's Montana, man. It's just another day in this area, but it's also one of the most breathtakingly beautiful places you could go to. The mountains, the sky, the weather. We have, snow is amazing in the winter, and then you have 4 seasons. Right now it's like 75 and perfect, but fall is on its way. So,
do you are you from Montana?
No, I'm from Colorado, but Rocky Mountains are in my blood. I love the West.
Tell me the story of people that are. We mentioned this. Almost everyone would probably know who you are, but tell the story of how you got to Montana and the church.
Yes, such a good wandering. What was that Beatles song, A Long and Winding Road?
Yes.
My wife and I met in New Mexico. She was doing a missions internship. Jenny, who was on this podcast, she and I was a youth pastor. She was a missions intern. She had a year-long commitment to no romantic dating relationships, but we met halfway through that year.
I come from that. I come from that culture. Yep.
Yeah. Go ahead. Right. Some forced sanctification.
Yes.
It's called a cult. No, I'm kidding. She had vowed before the Lord, hey, I'm just not going to date for a year. I'm going to honor this. Do this is no distraction. So of course, that's always when you meet the person.
Yes,
and you liked the challenge.
Yes.
Yeah, I was like, I have made no such oath.
Trust me.
So I made, we honored the commitment, but I asked her out at midnight the day it ended.
Yes.
And she said yes. We dated for a year, got married, and then I had. At that point, I was the assistant youth pastor. Then I became the youth pastor after the high school pastor moved along. And we thought we were going to stay there and be there and be happy. I never wanted to be a youth pastor using ministry
Sure.
as a totem pole to get to being a real pastor.
Sure.
I was happy to be a student pastor forever, but God really began to put on our hearts that we were supposed to say yes to this ask that had come our way to become a teaching pastor at a church in California, in Orange County. And honestly, I almost turned it down. And the thing I compare it to a lot is, you know, that snake that Moses raised up out of brass, and the children of Israel who had been bit by snakes didn't die because they looked at? That was awesome. But then they named it and it turned into an idol, Nehushtan.
Wow.
And this thing that was used in one season became actually damaging to them because they had begun to look to it for validation. I think that's what ministry can become in different ways. I almost turned down the chance that was God's call undeniably in my life to go and teach at this church in California because I had said, no, I would never do that. And it was almost like I was now naming my snake. You know, I guess the moral of the story is don't name snakes, right?
Yeah.
But we ended up saying yes eventually. God said, I'm God, you're not, so you're doing this. And we accepted the call, began doing ministry in a 2,000 person church in San Juan Capistrano.
Sure.
And again, we had season passes to Disneyland. I was learning to surf. Turns out In-N-Out is delicious.
Oh yeah. Come on, somebody.
So
From
I thought,
Montana.
this is where I'm going to be forever. We had a condo with an ocean view. I'm like, this is Dana Point, California. Shockingly, has really nice weather. So I'm like, thank you, Lord. Here we are. And the same sermons I was giving to junior high and high school students were quote unquote working in big church. And I was shocked by that.
That's awesome.
Turns out the Bible's good no matter how old you are. But then, literally, we had one child and we're pregnant with our second, though we didn't know it. God opened up a portal and was like, Montana. And here's how that looked. I had guest spoken at a rodeo arena in Montana where they were having a little youth thing. And a guy said to me afterwards. Did you
speak at a lot of rodeo events? Was that a normal thing for you?
No. Thank you for that. No, it was not normal. But I'd never been to Montana. I'm so embarrassed to tell you guys. My wife only knew of Joe, Montana, because she was from the Bay Area.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
I only knew of the sandwich from Arby's.
Hannah, Montana?
The big Montana. No, the big Montana is a sandwich at Arby's.
Oh my gosh.
And that's all I associated. I was like, let's go to Montana, see what that's all about.
How did anybody accept you in Montana with that? But go ahead. So you go to Montana, you're preaching in a horse arena.
I did it. It was fine. The ministry was great. The guy said to me, you should come here and start a church because there's not the kind of church that you would lead up here. It just doesn't exist. And I said, sure, man, I'll pray about that, but had no intention of doing so.
Christian no, right there.
I get home and it was like a sliver in my soul, a little splinter. I'm supposed to move to Montana and start a church. I just knew it. And I was like, oh, jeez, this is... So I told Jen, I was like, we're probably going to have to move to Montana.
Jeez.
And we did. And that was 17 years ago.
How long, honest question, I guess all my questions are honest. It's always fun.
I have a dishonest question I'd like to throw
be honest, because I've not been honest so far. How long until Montana got in your heart?
It happened in phases. At first, we had said, we'll stay here 5 years, God, no matter what. Like I was committed to not be that guy that goes and like 18 months later is out. So at the beginning, I told Jenny, look, I feel God's in it. I don't know. Let's not even look up for 5 years. Let's give it our all for that long. And then we can actually, at that point, I wasn't saying we'll leave in 5 years, but I was saying, I'm not going to leave in 2. I'm not going to leave in 3. I'm going to give this 5 years. That felt substantial. I don't know where I pulled that number from, but it felt like in 5 years, we'll look up and say, is God in it?
Yeah. At a certain age, 5 years definitely feels like an eternity. Yes.
Yeah. So that was kind of our thinking. And then, we could always move back to wherever, California, New Mexico, get a job. Our kids would only be 5 and 7 at that point. So, we'll just, and at 5 years, God had already so miraculously exceeded our expectations. We had a building, we had hundreds of people, there was salvation, there was life, there was so much. And then we laughed about that, had our 5-year birthday, and then that year our daughter went to heaven. So we bought we bought our second piece of real estate, which was her grave.
Wow.
And I think that really solidified, owning a plot of ground where my daughter's buried here really connected in a different way me to this state in some strange way. But if I'm going to be completely transparent, it wasn't until COVID that I began experiencing the beauty and the joy of Montana. I was so busy, hammered down for the first, 12 years that I didn't fly fish or hike or do any of those things really. And so in the last couple of years, I've really fallen in love with Montana.
That's amazing.
Wow.
What a journey.
We talk a lot about culture as, leaders, and it's so cool to hear the origin story, how you ended up somewhere, like in your case, planting a church. And when you first started, it was one church. You guys have multiple churches all over, not just in Montana. But culture is a big deal to you. We were talking earlier, like Banning's been out with you several times and has experienced that. So before you started Montana, you were intentional. Like culture happens either intentionally or unintentionally. You're going to end up with culture. But what were you bringing into that is now like this culture that is, all over in multiple states around you? Like, were there some things that were marking things that you carried with you that you were saying, I'm going to do differently? Or like, what's behind the story, with the culture you've created there?
And let me follow up on that question as well in regards to, I think so many pastors are not intentional about culture, so they're not quite sure what they're building.
Yeah.
My point is this, is that they're not quite sure the church they see in their heart.
Yeah.
And what they want it to be. How was it establishing culture and actually seeing a church in your heart?
Mm-hmm.
And then seeing it manifest and then multiply in different locations?
That's a great question. I'll be honest, and I say that what I'm about to say is more descriptive than prescriptive.
Sure.
This is just our journey.
Yep.
I didn't nail down, as we began, I didn't have hey, here are our 10 items of our values.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. This is our DNA genetic, because I didn't know, was it going to work? Like I didn't know. I had never started a church before, and all my friends who had, this is 2007. So I would call up my friends who were pastors. They're 50, 55.
Yeah, totally.
They're going, oh, I started in a living room of a house or apartment complex.
Yeah.
So and then I would go, what do you do? Well, we duplicated tapes. And I'm like, that doesn't really help me. I don't know. So we were doing stuff like,
we were printing
newsletters. The iPhone came out in the end of the first year of our church, but before that there wasn't. So we were doing MySpace codes. We were trying to do stuff like you could copy this code and it would go into your MySpace and it would invite people to church. And that was pretty cutting edge. And, we had a live, Ustream webcast from the day one, and we were the first church in the state of Montana. We looked every church we could find. No one had a podcast. We were the first to be podcasting. So we were doing stuff that was innovative in its time, from what I understood, because I didn't know about ARC if it was going. I didn't know or have friends who were young who were church planting. So it wasn't the same thing that it is today in my mind, where now there's Craig Groeschel and Elevation, and kind of you hear all these things. Those were all kind of happening, but I wasn't aware of them because it wasn't the tribe I grew up in. Mm-hmm. So we literally just started a Bible study that 14 people came to. We didn't have launch preview services. We didn't spend a year getting to know the area. We got here on a Tuesday, started a Bible study on the Sunday.
Wow.
And we said, welcome to Fresh Life. And we had invited people around town and they came. So it wasn't until about 3 years in that I went, okay, we need to sort of like, now that there is a church, we need to sort of like nail down. And so what I did was I took our team and we went away and we just said, what's working? What are the things that they seem DNA to us? They seem intuitive to us. They seem like we do it without even realizing it, but now we need to kind of like codify it. And we literally did just that. So for us, it's not about us. We're here to make Jesus famous. We tremble before God's word because it's alive. We are a youth-led movement. We'll always unapologetically focus on reaching young people. We won't wear Saul's armor. We'll do things no one's doing to reach people no one's reaching. We do more by doing less. We're not going to have 58 ministries and crocheting on Tuesday, and we're going to simplify so we can excel. Things like that. We came up with 12 of those, and then we also came up with 6 behavioral values that are true of our staff members. That we're driven, we're humble, we're comfortable in our own skins, we're hungry, we're fun-loving. And so we can kind of take a Venn diagram of those 6, and the sweet spot in the center is who we're going to hire. We're not just going to hire someone who's talented but not humble. We're not going to hire someone who's humble but not driven, not coachable, not comfortable in their own skin, et cetera. So only the person who's in the sweet spot of all 6 of those things is going to be the ideal Fresh Life staff member, right? So, but the wisdom for us and our experience was I didn't know what I didn't know. And had I sat down at the beginning and said, here are what's going to be what our church is going to be, I would shudder to think what would be on that document.
Yeah.
Whereas I had a lot of growing up to do as a pastor. it was without form and void
Yes,
what exactly God was going to do.
Yes.
So we sort of stumbled and backed into, hey, these are the things that they seem to really resonate. They seem to really work. And now let's codify them for the future generations of our staff.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me. So many, when you're with leaders, they want to know, like, how'd you do it? What'd you do? And there's always this concept, well, we had a 10-year vision, then we just worked backwards. And I'm like, gosh, it's never worked like that for me. Partly is my personality is I'm like, I don't know what it's going to look like until I get my hands in it. And then I'm like, oh, okay, this is what I think it's going to look like. And also you're just kind of on, I don't know, you just take the next step and you take the next step and then you kind of figure it out. And I love what you said, codified. You kind of being, oh, that's what's happening, or, oh, that's what it looks like. All right, well, let's put some language around that now that I didn't have before.
Yeah.
Or I think the permission to be able to get into it and go, I have a picture, but I'm not fully sure yet. Yeah. I actually have to get my feet in the ground. I can get my hands on something to actually begin to go, oh, I think this is actually what's in my heart.
Yeah.
This is actually what I think is going to happen. I don't know if people feel pressure to have to get there sooner than they actually need to, but I love you sharing that journey. One of the things I was struck by was the level of intentionality and excellence, and yet still remaining very authentic and relational with your team, interacting with people, very relational, very connected, very for each other, and yet real attention to detail in some areas, real value for creative expression and excellence in that thing. Is this something that is just a natural outflow of who you and your wife are? I know she's a big part of it. Is it something you've intentionally gone after? Can you kind of walk through that a little bit?
Yeah, without a doubt. No, I mean, I think the language we like to use is borrowed from Danny Meyer, who's the founder of Shake Shack. He says the founder's primary responsibility is to keep the salt shaker at the center of the table. And like I said, it took us some time to get to where that salt shaker is supposed to go. But he talks about walking into his restaurants and, he is painstakingly, carefully, and with their team strategize where they want the salt shaker to go. But of course, you walk in and it's over here. It's not where it's supposed to be the center. It's way over here. And so he says you have to gently but firmly and consistently be putting the salt shaker back to the center of the table. And I think that the helpful role that values and vision and language articulated lovingly and consistently, and by the way, if hypocritically, it's completely useless.
Yes.
So if this is something you just say and expect other people to blindly follow, but it's not how you're living, it has to come out of your heart. But the helpful thing about putting it out there is that what could be intuitive is now formal, and therefore we're all held accountable to it. And the lack of buy-in consistently across the board is what deteriorates team morale. If someone goes, oh, if you're a rock star and really good at XYZ, these rules don't apply to you, then you basically are being told, like, we'll prostitute our values for your gift. So I think when you say, hey, this is who we are, this is what we're called to do, this is where we're going, and this is how we believe our best chance of getting there looks like, then you get to constantly and consistently, hey, let's get that back to the center of the table. And excellence being one of those things, hospitality being one of those values, like you said, fighting for the one, fighting for God's word to be paramount. And then we get to continue to be held accountable to a standard that's bigger than just one person. It's something that we've all agreed on, and we all have said this is what we believe God's called us to do in order to fulfill our calling and our mandate. Yeah,
I love that.
Oh, good.
How often are you trumpeting that stuff?
More than you think you should. The moment. What do they say? Trust is built in drops, lost in gallons.
Yeah.
And vision, as Annie Stanley always says, leaks. So you think like, okay, I got a first example. I have this story I've told at a staff advance 2 different times. It's also in a book that I've published that people on our team for sure have read and heard, but I'd never preached it on a Sunday. And I used it this past weekend. And one of our key core people came up to me and said, oh my gosh, that was touching. that was unbelievable. I've never heard that before.
That's a core family story.
Yeah.
Core story. But I've told it 3 times in 7 years.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, it's a core story everybody knows.
Yes.
So whatever you think, like, oh my gosh, even like, I know a guy in our church who came up to me at the gym the other day and he said, hey, what is that class you're always talking about for members? Literally, we think we're talking about this all the time.
So true. People don't listen.
Or they come, their attendance patterns are even more irregular than we think,
That's a crazy thing. If you're really casting vision, if you're really directing, the thought that you're going to share it on a Sunday and everybody's going to hear it. And I know we know this.
Single time.
Yeah. I know we know this, right? But just flat out, our church doesn't all come on Sunday. Yeah, that's
well, and you guys are doing this multi-site, different places. So we talk about culture, intentionality, like that just adds the difficulty or the challenges for drift to happen.
Yeah, you got to keep, like, there were these two synchronized ice skaters, a couple, and they were asked, how do you perform? They said, well, before we go on the ice, we stand in an embrace, and we stand there long enough to get our heart beating. Your heart will eventually, if you hold someone, will start beating on the same beat. And I love that analogy because I think it's both, of course, us and Jesus, but also as a team. Like, how can two walk together unless they're of one accord? Yeah. So there has to be a regular cadence. And of course, for us, being in 4 different states and scattered abroad and all the things, it's the weekly Zooms. It's being intentional about bringing language and vision and wins in even into a team email. It's also for us, we do a staff summer camp where every staff member and their families come, and we just had it 2 weeks ago. We all camp together. We have meals together. There has to be that doing of life that will create, you see each other holding each other's babies. There's something different that happens in those moments that sinks back the heart back up to center.
So good.
One of the things that I'm intrigued by is the ability to have big vision even in smaller settings. And it's fascinating to me with you. You're coming out of Orange County. I mean, people are just are living on top of each other in Southern California in so many ways. There's just so many people, so many opportunities, so many businesses are based out of there, so many top-level CEOs there, all the type of stuff. You come to Montana, and yet you still have a big vision. I actually asked you this, Levi. Is there any other national voices coming out of Montana? Listen, I don't know all the voices coming out of Montana, so forgive me if I've forgotten, but I couldn't really think of any other national voice coming out of Montana. What would you say to pastors who are in smaller settings, not just smaller churches, but I'm talking about smaller settings, smaller cities, but are still called to cultivate a pretty big vision and a pretty big dream for some stuff? What would your advice be to them? What's been that journey for you?
Oh, thank you. There's such a tension in there, isn't that? Because there's the whole, like, do you seek great things for yourself? Seek them not. But there's also
totally.
Great commission. So it's like, I don't know. I feel like we all are kind of called to reach the whole world. So there should be a grandiosity that's if we're following the Holy Spirit. But then again, we can only steward our own unique calling. So
agreed.
And Paul said, I could get bronze and silver, but I want to get gold. Hello. I think there is good ambition. We have to always crucify it, pour salt on it. But there is the sense in which, like, Jesus told the disciples, don't wrangle for the seat of honor. But I don't think he was, trying to get them to not want greatness. So we should want greatness in our own lane for the glory of God. He
actually told them how to get greatness. Interesting enough, that story's an interesting one because he didn't rebuke them for wanting greatness.
Yeah.
He rebuked them for how they were going about it. He just said, hey, listen, let me just give you let me give you the key to greatness. But so keep going. I'm with you.
Don't send your mom in for a favor. Is that the moral of the story?
Get your own backbone. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay, so when I began to have a call to preach, there always was the picture in my mind as a little boy, 7 to 8 years old. I used to turn the lights off in the sanctuary of the church where my dad was an assistant pastor. And I would always pause on the stage before I turned the lights off in the big room. There was several thousand chairs in that room. And I always stand there. And even as a little kid, I was struck, maybe I was 10 then, by this is a call in my life. I'm going to preach in this room one day.
Wow.
And I did. And I have done that. And there's always been a sense of, I'm supposed to preach to a lot of people. I'm supposed to preach in the world. There's going to be that's what God put me on this earth for. I'm going to do it. Right. And there was never a sense of, like, that's what I want. It's going to fulfill some hole inside of me. There was just a sense and an awareness of a big vision of reaching lots of people before I die. Evangelistic gift, prophetic voice. It was just kind of like, that's what God's given me to steward. And if I don't do it, I'm not honoring him. So that never went away. In Orange County, I started doing events, started to get, be asked to speak at events, and I'm reaching thousands of people. So when the Montana proposition became on my radar that this is what the Holy Spirit was doing, my confusion very much was, and every wise voice I went to, I sat across a pancakes from a man who told me, Levi, this is not God's will. God's put you on this earth to reach millions of people, and there are not a million people in this state.
A million.
So he said, why would God do that? It's not good stewardship. Yes. So he just told me that. But then literally,
how did he just shoot Montana down like that? Everybody in Montana's upset right now.
He did it dirty. He actually said, he said, there are more cows than people. Why would God send you there?
It's not that he's not speaking facts around the stats, but yes, continue
it's
about
human wisdom is what I concluded.
Yes, keep going.
It's human wisdom.
Keep going.
I
interrupted your story. Go ahead.
No, it's good. Human wisdom says it's not good math. But where I got to thinking about it was like, when does God's strategy ever make sense to man?
Yes.
Little boy against a giant, marching around a wall to tear the walls down. You know, so a virgin's going to bring a baby into the world. Like, God's not really good at making sense, quote unquote.
Yes.
So where I just said is like, I'm not going to try and reconcile my vision to reach a lot of people with a platform, but then I'm also called to go to Kalispell, Montana. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? So I just said, I'm going to go and die here and be willing to be obscure, be willing to be hidden. And I think part of it was my own development of putting Isaac on the altar, because I did very much feel like out of sight, out of mind.
Yes.
I'm not going to be in the game. I'm not going to be known. I'm not going to be around. But I said, like, I'm going to go, if I go and serve these 100 people or whatever God does, fine. And ironically, from that moment forward, proliferation of outside asks, outside opportunity, international opportunity, books, all those things came from my willingness to be hidden. So I guess let God, just do what God calls you to do. Let him steer the results, right?
Yes.
What would you say to leaders specifically on this like topic of comparison? Because I'm sure you went through that in saying yes to going to Kalispell. And then, you know, God's giving you influence and taking you places, you know, writing books and speaking, traveling, you know, social media, all these things.
Being on the pastor's podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
that's the high moment of my life. It all down from here.
It's all down.
Well, here's the funny thing. There's always comparison, but the fortunate part for my calling was I was in 2007. Twitter had just started, but had not blown up yet. So there was no Instagram, there was no Facebook. I didn't know that you could be famous being a pastor. It wasn't even a thing in my, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Thank you, Jesus. Let's go back to that.
I more felt afraid I was going to miss out on God's call.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
But that's like not the landscape now. So the gift for you, you know, for us that didn't grow up with iPhones or, you know, there's a world before, and you know, as you're speaking to young leaders, people that are watching now, this is the landscape. The thing to pursue is I want the followers, I want these things, you know, for good reasons, and then comparison sneaks in. So what do you say to leaders that is their world, and the enticement, the, you know, ambition's good, like we talked about earlier. How do you navigate that? Because I think it's killing a lot of leaders. You mentioned earlier, like, unique call, like steward the call on your life, but comparison is enticing. You're like, that's working for them. If I do that, I could maybe get some of those
I have
results.
never thought about planting in Montana until I met Levi. Now I'm thinking this is going to work well.
Does that make sense though? Like, because I think you've navigated that and you have authority and you've been in both places. I think this is a real issue for a lot of young leaders, this thing of comparison, and, you know, we're missing.
I think it's so good. I think this is what do they say? It's not a problem to be solved. It's a tension to be managed, right? Like, this is not going away.
No, yeah.
But I think it's remembering that if you strive to get it, you will have to try and keep it, right? So if you strive and angle and finagle and get some attention or notoriety or whatever, like, you're going to have to now keep it there. But if the Holy Spirit chooses to exalt, because he opens doors no one can shut and shuts doors no one can open, there's not going to be a striving. So, and it's for all of us, like, oh, they got invited to that conference. Oh, that'd be nice. I would love to preach there. But if I get that, if I made that happen in the flesh or whatever, not that you really even can do that, when I get there, that's going to be agonizing to try and prepare and preach when I did it because I needed that to deliver something in me.
Yeah.
But if, like, man, God humble, like, though I'm humble and whatever, God chooses to, for whatever reason, give me this chance, then I get to know he did it. It's for him. Like, I get to have a peace all through the delivery. I'm not up there going, do you like me? Am I enough?
Yeah.
Does this make me, like, because that can't fill your hole. Like, that's you're going to be just as dead off the stage as you were before. So I think it's impossible to bless anybody when you're trying to impress them. And I think the moment I need you or this opportunity to validate me, I'm naming snakes again. Now this is now an idol for me.
Young pastors that are coming up, or even established guys like me or different ones, if you were to sit down in a room with them and give them your top 2 things that you would have to say about preaching, what would it be?
Well, there's the whole be brief, be brilliant, be gone.
I have heard somebody said I've never heard a bad short sermon.
Yeah, that's right. And which is good. Easier said than done. I think the repetition, that there really is something to be said for tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them. Like we said, we think people retain, but they don't. You only hang on to a tiny portion of what you hear once. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think I say mix it up. I say have fun. I think it's so easy to get into a rut. It's always this funny story, and then the text, and then this thing, and then you're gonna blah blah blah, and then it points. And so I'm on this kick right now where I'm refusing to have my points rhyme, or I'll start with the same letter. So I outline that way, but then I intentionally confuse it up because I just started to feel like things start to feel cutesy and Dr. Seussy. For a while I was kind of everything kind of some historical thing and tidbit, and then feeling like you get painted to a corner and props. I think mix it up. I think Jesus, he used visual illustrations, sheep, little kids, bushes, prodigal sons. He told stories. Paul, quoted rock stars of his day, poets. I think mix it up, have fun, be interesting. I think those would be some of my top things. So, and of course, outside of I'm assuming everyone's keeping it about Jesus.
No, of course,
speak for itself.
Totally. No,
preaching truths in context.
You did what I wanted. I mean, we can get that other stuff, but I love what you just said. Even just giving a quick insight into kind of how you're actually approaching it. Yeah. Not wanting to get in a rut, not wanting to get stuck, not wanting to. I absolutely love that. How do people connect to what you're doing? Obviously, they can find you online and all that type of stuff, but podcasts and books and. Where do they go find all this stuff?
Everything's kind of one-stop shopping at levilusko.com. We got a new kids book we're really excited about called Marvel at the Moon. That's 90 devotions to help a child know they're never alone in God's majestic universe.
Come on.
So cool.
My wife and I have a devotional for married couples that we put out a while back that's been fun to see people read, and it has homework and stuff and little places to write love notes back and forth to each other. Those are 2 projects we're super excited about right now.
That's right. Check them out. I love the resources you guys are putting out just to strengthen people. Levi, thanks for being on the podcast. Thanks for jumping in and just having a conversation. I taking notes and just absolutely love who you are and what you're doing. I think for me, when you get behind the scenes with people, this is really what stirs my heart the most, is just really encountering the real deal behind the scenes and off the stage. And I honored to be running with you and appreciate what you're doing. So thanks for jumping on.
Well, likewise. And if I could add one last thing on the back end, it's we leaders have to be humble enough to admit when we were wrong. And I think I'm always asking, like, hey, what about our culture does need to be fixed or is missing,
yes,
or where is it thin that needs to be thick, or vice versa. And when you were out, Banning, talking to you, so inspiring, hearing about the Jesus culture movement, the San Diego church, of course, Zack, and spending time with Chris. I mean, you sent me your culture doc, so I immediately sat down, was reading this over, praying through it, like, just because I want to learn. And I would hate to think we miss out on the new thing God's doing and the chance to evolve. And you just like, well, this is what our culture is, therefore this is how it always stays. And pretty soon it's like Ichabod, versus like staying in touch with the Spirit. So always be learning, have the humility to admit when you did it wrong and change it, right?
Yeah. I love it.
So good.
All right, Levi, we'll do it again. Thanks for jumping on with us. Man, I tell you, I absolutely have loved just sitting down and having other conversations with pastors. I know that not everybody listening to this podcast is a senior pastor, or maybe even paid staff pastor.
Yeah.
Everybody listening has a heart for the local church, but I just love getting insight into how people do things and why they do things. And I just feel like I'm just so much better when I'm able to sit down and kind of receive from how people are doing stuff.
I think it's like what you're talking about, conversations, hearing people's stories and journeys is one of the most under-recognized forms of encouragement, perspective. And, we get so busy, we do all these things, but when you just sit down and talk to someone, like it is a huge gift.
Yeah.
And I think we don't do it enough. So that's why I love this. It's like,
I do.
You just ask questions. Like
Yeah.
we're so busy. I don't think we ask enough questions.
Hearing their story, hearing how they got the insight that they got, hearing why they're doing what they're doing, it is good. And Levi's one of the best. So grateful. Zack, thanks for being a part of co-hosting the podcast.
Love
Great
it.
to have you back in the saddle. Although you do man camp, you do any, listen, man, there's a whole podcast series and seasons on man camp for men.
Yeah.
And phenomenal time. You just released one recently, a few months ago now, but so you can go get more of Zack. If you want more of Zack, it's all man camp right there.
It's so fun to look back, 2011, when we first just started the Jesus Culture podcast.
Gosh, it's
and
been
to
that long.
see, what's come, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah,
So
it
we're
is fun.
so honored that you guys would keep listening in. We hope this encourages you. I love this stuff. Like I listen to podcasts all the time.
Well, I can't leave without giving the infomercial, JesusCultureSchool.com. Go check it out if you're interested on growing and learning more about your leadership, as well as Pastors Conference, JesusCulture.com. You can find out more about Pastors Conference. Let's do it again.
Let's do it.